This deal is being sold as a win for free trade. But here's the contradiction. India and the EU didn't suddenly embrace open markets. They rushed this deal because both feel cornered. So the real question isn't what's inside the trade pact. It's what fear pushed it over the line right now. And why are leaders talking about a new global order over a trade deal? The European Union and India are preparing to announce a major trade agreement in New Delhi this week. Negotiations wrapped up just days before the visit of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa. The announcement is expected after meetings with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi following India's Republic Day celebrations. Talks between India and the EU started back in 2007. They stalled in 2013 over disputes on market access, regulations, and tariffs. Formal negotiations restarted in July 2022. According to officials, the deal will expand access for Indian exports into EU markets. It will also make it easier for European goods and investments, including cars and beverages, to enter India. Leaders say the agreement covers economies representing about 25% of global GDP and 1/3 of global trade. That figure still needs to be verified. European officials describe the deal as a signal against protectionism. They say it shows a preference for trade agreements over tariffs. Von der Leyen has gone further, saying India and the EU want to work together to shape a new global order. The timing matters. Both India and the EU are dealing with trade tensions involving the United States. India is facing steep U.S. tariffs imposed last year. The EU has also faced recent U.S. threats to escalate trade pressure on European allies. The agreement still needs approval from the European Parliament and the European Council. Formal signing is expected later this year. Analysts say some sensitive areas remain unresolved. These include access to India's automobile market, agricultural goods, and carbon-linked tariffs. This part is analysis, not fact. This deal wasn't pushed forward by optimism. It was pushed forward by pressure. Start with the first power dynamic: strategic hedging against the United States. The mainstream framing focuses on growth and cooperation. What it downplays is how directly this deal responds to U.S. trade unpredictability. India is dealing with U.S. tariffs and slow-moving talks with Washington. The EU has just come through a volatile period where U.S. trade threats resurfaced almost overnight. The unspoken incentive here is leverage. By locking in alternative markets, both sides reduce their exposure to U.S. pressure, and they do it without openly confronting Washington. The second power dynamic is signaling versus substance. Leaders are using unusually big language. The mother of all deals. A new global order. That kind of rhetoric should raise questions. Big words often appear when the details are politically sensitive. Some of the hardest issues, agriculture, carbon tariffs, and automobiles, are the same ones that caused talks to collapse in the past. If those issues were fully resolved, we would likely see clearer specifics by now. The lack of detail suggests compromises may have been delayed, softened, or carefully packaged for domestic audiences. There are two main ways to read this. The first is the benign interpretation. This is a genuine long-term alignment between two major economies preparing for a more multipolar world, where trade blocs matter more. The second is the cynical interpretation. This is a fast-tracked political deal meant to project unity and stability, with the hardest chapters pushed down the road to survive domestic politics in India and Europe. There's also one assumption worth challenging. The coverage often assumes that more trade automatically means more stability. History suggests that isn't always true. Trade deals can just as easily deepen disputes when enforcement, standards, or climate rules collide later. In the short term, markets may respond positively. The deal signals reduced uncertainty. India gains leverage in its negotiations with the US by showing it has other options. The EU sends a message that it can still close major deals, even with internal divisions. Looking further ahead, the consequences are more complicated. If carbon tariffs stay unresolved, this deal could become a test case for climate-linked trade rules. European firms may gain deeper access to India's consumer market, but that could trigger domestic backlash inside India. Indian exporters may benefit from scale. At the same time, compliance with EU regulations could raise costs. In the early phase, the biggest winners are political leaders on both sides. For them, this is a diplomatic success. Export-oriented industries looking to diversify also stand to gain. Potential losers include domestic producers suddenly exposed to competition, smaller firms that struggle to meet EU regulatory standards, and climate negotiations, if trade rules weaken environmental goals. More broadly, this deal enables more bloc-to-bloc trade agreements. It reduces dependence on a US-centered trade system, but it also restricts flexibility. Once rules are locked in, future negotiations become harder, especially if enforcement disputes emerge. Several questions remain open. What exactly did India concede on automobiles, agriculture, and carbon tariffs? Details are still unclear. Are enforcement mechanisms strong or deliberately vague? Will the deal survive political pressure inside EU member states during ratification? How does Washington respond, by adapting quietly or by escalating trade pressure? And does this become a real alternative to US-led trade norms, or mostly a symbolic alignment? Watch the fine print, watch the ratification debates, and pay close attention to what officials avoid emphasizing. That's usually where the real story is.